Welcome. You're ready for today's webcast, and so are we. Please note that this webcast is being recorded and the on-demand replay will be made available via email, along with a download of the slides in a few business days following the webcast. For the best webcast experience, we recommend viewing today's event via laptop or desktop while using Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. Please ensure you have a reliable internet connection, all other applications are closed, and that your pop-up blocker software has been disabled. We want today's webcast to be as interactive as possible, so please send us your thoughts and questions throughout the presentation. During the live broadcast, we will answer as many questions as time allows. Next to the slide window, you can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box and hit submit. In the resource list widget on the dock, you can access today's content-related handouts. To stay updated on all of our future programs, sign up for our webcast digest today by visiting the call to action window on your screen or by visiting the resource list widget on the dock. To determine your CPE progress, click the CPE widget on the dock. You must remain logged in for the entire program, and you must respond to at least 75% of the polling questions to be eligible for credit. You must also be individually logged into today's program, meaning one person per computer. Group participation will not be awarded credit. Once you've met the minimum CPE requirements, click the View Certificate button to download a copy of your certificate. Note that CPE credit is available for live webcasts only. If you experience any technical issues viewing or hearing this presentation, slides not advancing, or the inability to answer polling questions, please refresh your browser window. If you continue to experience issues, click on the question mark Help widget on the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. Please note, if you're viewing today's webcast in full screen mode, you'll not be able to see the pop-up polling questions. If a polling question is announced and you cannot see it, please be sure to exit full screen mode. And now, please welcome our host for today's webcast.
Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you so much for joining our session today about the results of our Q2 CFO Survey report here at Grant Thornton. My name is Fabiana Corredor from the marketing team, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's panel. I'm super excited to introduce you to our different experts. Each of them brings a very interesting perspective about the topics that we're going to be covering today. So we have actually two mics in the room. Mike Desmond from our audit team here at GT. I'm actually going to be referring to Desmond as Des. And then we also have Paul Edwards, which is one of our leaders on the Global Transaction Advisory practice, and Mike Hennessy, our partner and leader for the Finance Transformation practice. So before we get started, I wanted each of you to maybe give the audience a little bit of a background on your role and the perspective that you bring to the topic.
Great. Thank you, Fabi. And it's great to be with everybody. Yeah, wonderful to be with everybody here today. Mike Desmond. I've got a quarter century as a partner in professional services. I'm an auditor by trade. I've also spent time on your side of the desk as a C-suite finance executive, as well as having served on boards and audit committees. So it's those three different lenses that I'll bring to today's conversation. And I'll pass it over to Paul.
Thanks, Des. Paul Edwards, formerly Global Practice Lead at the Stax entity that was acquired by Grant Thornton 9 months ago. Now proudly lead the commercial due diligence practice as part of transactions here at Grant Thornton. 25 years experience in deal making at both a corporate as well as a private equity lens. Have worked on over 1,000 deals in that time period for Fortune 5 companies right the way through to small cap and over a variety of industry and economic cycles, of course.
And good morning, good afternoon, Mike Hennessy. As Fabi mentioned, I lead our national practice for finance modernization. We have a team of 20 partners, 200 practitioners spread across the country. We serve the office of CFO, so that could be FP&A, that could be controllership, that could be treasury. And we're often brought in with some sort of triggering event. And hearkening to the name of the webcast about uncertainty, it's been busy these days as there's a lot going on, as you all know. So pleasure.
Thank you, team. And with that, to give you a little bit of an overview of the topics that we're going to be covering today, Grant Thornton has been performing this survey to CFOs and finance executives since beginning of 2021. It's one of our most read reports. And actually, we started doing this webcast beginning of the year with Q1 as the first webcast, and it received really, really good feedback. So we're deciding to continue the webcast in an ongoing basis to have an opportunity to review the most important perspectives of how the sentiment is changing quarter over quarter and provide some real world perspective on how we could be going in terms of our action plans and priorities for the upcoming quarters based on what we see on the survey, but also based on what we're hearing and breathing from our clients' interactions every month. So the survey was answered between April and May. It was answered by over 200 senior finance executives. If you see, it's a healthy mix between CFOs, chief accounting officers, controllers. Everyone has seniority above a director level. And in terms of representation of industries, it's really well represented by over 10 different industries. And when it comes to company size, if you see, there's also a mix between the companies over $1 billion and then also what we call the upper mid-market. But in order to participate, you needed to be on a company over 100 million in annual revenue. And we typically maintain certain questions the same just to track really the trend month over month, quarter over quarter, and year over year. But depending on what is going on during that quarter, we bring very strategic topics into the survey. For example, this quarter, Paul is here because there wasn't a specific section that we created with all of the M&A increasing activity that we're seeing in the market. So we have a specific section for M&A and value creation. Of course, technology and AI is always part of the mix, in addition to the generic economic outlook sentiments that we're experiencing. So with that, let's dive into the results. And I'm going to bring this first in to share the high-level sentiment of what we're seeing in terms of the economic outlook on the survey.
Very good. Thank you, Fabi. And obviously, the big picture story here is that there's a meaningful decline in the economic optimism. Only 37% of the CFOs are optimistic about the U.S. economy over the next 6 months, and this is down from 46% just a quarter ago, and is the lowest level of optimism since we started asking this question going back to the 2001 cycle of Q3 that you referenced earlier, Fabi. At the same time, pessimism is increasing up to 40%. And as you can see, the neutral sentiment is at 22%. Now, as shown here, you'll also see that our respondents, 67% of them indicated that they expect inflation to increase over the next 12 months. Now, it's probably important to note that the Q1 survey results, because of the timing of that survey, would not have picked up yet on the economic impacts of the Iran war. And so that wouldn't have been reflected in those results, but obviously are reflected in these results here from Q2. And so the ensuing impact on rising energy costs and the overall inflationary environment is coming through in these results. Another thing that's I found curious as I look back through our results over time is that Q2 tends to be a higher relative level of pessimism, sometimes tied to specific economic events, but I'm sometimes curious as to how it might tie into the ongoing operating cycles of entities and their reporting cycles from a budget period to actual results to outlooks to the future. But it's clear, one thing is for certain, that the CFOs and finance executives in today's environment are having to plan in something that is much more precarious than just even a quarter ago.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I think that was the big theme when we did the webcast. We were already expecting the optimism to go down even without doing the survey, but this just really confirms the impact that all of those geopolitical events have had into the results.
And so as we look at the results here, I think it's important to note a few things to draw from this. Even with the weaker economic optimism, there is still an expectation of profit growth over the next 12 months. Now, we're seeing that share of those organizations that are expecting growth has shifted from the 72% in Q1 down to 68% in Q2. And where we see that movement, you can see on both ends of the spectrum, those that were projecting larger contraction continue to project that. Those that were projecting larger expansion, also that percentage held relatively constant. Where we see the movement is in the margins, in the middle, and including those that are essentially flipping, if you will, from low levels of growth to low levels of contraction. And that's what we see in these results. In addition to that shift, the other notable thing here is that we're seeing that the rate of expected growth in the profile has softened. The average expected growth, profit growth, fell from approximately 4.8% back in Q1 to just 3.3% here in Q2. So that 31% decline in the average expected growth profit rate is indicating this, this overall pressure that we're all feeling in the overall economy. So while not broadly expecting contraction, our CFOs are clearly indicating that the growth expectations are going to be harder and slower. And that helps us kind of frame up the emphasis on the discipline that we will see throughout the rest of our conversation here this afternoon. Now, as we transition here to this slide, what you'll see is the increased focus and how that discipline is showing up in a focus on cost reduction. As we see the Q2 results reflect 87% of our CFOs that are now focused on cost reduction initiatives, which is up 14% compared with just Q1. And that cost containment need is among kind of the controllable set to offset where we see increases in energy and other uncontrollable costs. Now, as you can see here, some of those top areas for potential cuts include external costs like vendor and supplier costs, as well as external supporting, consulting and related fees. Material cost continues to be an area of focus, along with technology investments, the human capital aspects, both in terms of headcount, compensation, as well as the benefit side of it, inclusive of insurance, and as well as a slowing of the long-term strategic initiatives that are reflected in these results. So while we do not plan to cut any cost group remains at just 13%, which is down from the previous quarters. So I think maybe the key message coming in all of this is a very disciplined approach to cost management. CFOs are looking for efficiency, needing that efficiency to offset the areas of rising costs in energy and other inflationary environments, but they still need to protect the capabilities that are required to support growth, transformation, and resilience. So as we look at this next slide, what you'll see here is a consistent decline in confidence across the major business objectives from Q1 to Q2. So despite what we just saw in the previous part of the conversation, where there is an incremental need for increased cost savings, CFOs are indicating that their confidence in meeting those cost control objectives is at 42%, which is down 9 percentage points from Q1. Confidence in fulfilling the supply chain needs is at 43%, also down 15 percentage points there, and reflective of both the inflationary environment as well as some of the impacts of the global uncertainty. As you look at growth targets, the ability to and confidence in achieving those is at 45%, down 5 percentage points from the previous quarter, while meeting labor needs is at 48%, down just 3 percentage points. If we shift over to achieving the technology objectives, confidence is higher there at 60%, but still down slightly 2 percentage points from the last quarter. And so the strongest confidence level, as I said, is reflected in meeting the technology objectives, but even that reflects a decline period over period. So I think maybe our broader point here is that while ambition remains, our confidence reflected in the execution of that ambition has weakened. Yeah. Now, inflation is also playing an active role in the planning assumptions. As we referenced in the earlier slide, you got 67% of our respondents that were expecting inflationary increases over the 12 months coming forward, and including 18% that expected a significant increase, while the remaining 49% were expecting just somewhat of an increase. And only 14% of our respondents actually expected a reduction in the inflation rate, which reinforces that our CFO population is not treating inflation as being fully behind them. The cost management responses are becoming more structural. 67% are reporting that at least moderate changes to both cost management and efficiency initiatives are needed, including 52% that look at this from a standpoint of moderately restructuring their operations. 11% are looking at pursuing what's characterized as more of a major overhaul, while 4% are undergoing a more comprehensive transformation across multiple operational areas. Last couple of points here that I'd like to highlight is that it's clear that the tariffs and the trade policy shifts continue to impact CFO planning. 66% showing that tariffs and trade policy shifts have had a moderate or a major impact on their business, while nearly 92% are citing at least some effect. So taken together, the story is a combination of economic uncertainty, policy pressure, and as CFOs push forward with a more disciplined and structural cost action.
And I'm wondering, Des, before we jump into the first polling questions, what are some of Mike and Paul's thoughts related to this sentiment overall, if this kind of like aligns to what you have been hearing in the last couple of months?
It certainly does, Fabi. It varies by industry, and it's not just a back office discussion, right? When we're thinking about cost containment, sometimes it's in operations, sometimes it's Salesforce accountability. So we're seeing it across the board. Paul, I hear you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, Mike, I was just going to double down on that. I think for us, there's this bifurcation to some extent of concern on the macroeconomics, but also potentially looking at things within your control, which tend to be operational change, the way in which you're improving your systems, et cetera, some of the transformation considerations that Mike had been mentioning as well. A good number of those things are basically the things behind some of the M&A activity that we're seeing at the moment.
And then that's kind of where the execution gap becomes so important. You almost see a little bit of paralysis with some of our companies as far as where to start. Most companies know what to do, especially around technology and transformation. The harder question is whether they have the governance, the talent, the data, the operating discipline to convert those plans into measurable outcomes. My 25-year career, I can't remember a time where I hear the words ROI more frequently, but each and every action is tied to an ROI. We see that across industries, across verticals. So Fabi, to that end, maybe we do jump to the first polling question.
Yeah, sure. So for the first polling question, we would love to know what are the primary barriers currently preventing your organization from achieving your cost attainment goals. Please select up to 3. So focus on the top 3 and read them well before making your choices. The first one is about lacking a clear insight into where to cost. The other option is you don't have sufficient people, budget, or time to pursue cost initiatives. So it may be a prioritization issue, legacy systems or technology limitations, a high fixed cost-based structure. You are concerned about how those cost reductions could potentially impact your revenue or your customer experience, or you feel there's some limitations on the leadership and executive alignment. And then last one, organizational change. So we'll give you a couple of more seconds to answer, and we'll share the results with you live. We have 70% of the responses. Hopefully we can get that up to 90% plus. Let's give it a couple of more seconds. Okay, so let's see. starting from the highest, 35% picked legacy systems or technology limitations, followed by we don't have the people, the budget, or the time to pursue cost initiatives by 29%. 25% do not have a clear roadmap of where to cut, followed by 20% on concerns about impacting to customer experience. And then the other three are between 10 to 15% with change management, leadership alignment, and high fixed cost base. What are your thoughts, guys, about this? Anything surprises you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is consistent with what we're seeing. It's the legacy systems. They're not ready for the change that's needed. And then, by the way, our capacity is stretched as is with our business as usual day jobs. So how do we go about executing these new initiatives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting because even if we saw in the prior slide that 36% of companies may potentially look into cutting technology investments, as you're going to see in the next section, the spend increases on technology are actually expected to continue increasing at a high rate. So I think that potential cut in technology is not really coming as expected. So despite these limitations, this is one of the areas where we see actually increases, and companies are being really creative on how to cut costs from other areas without impacting the investments on AI. So I think that's a good segue into the next section that Mike is going to be leading. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike, again.
Yeah, of course. And I found this piece pretty interesting. Despite the doom and gloom and the economic pessimism or caution that Des had articulated, CFOs are still increasing spending in targeted areas. You see, IT and digital transformation are leading the investment category with 2/3 of folks, or 67%, expecting that these expenses will increase over the next 12 months. Cyber and risk and security, we hear about that all the time. That's at 60%, followed closely by sales and marketing. So again, continued to invest in growth. Workforce compensation and benefits a little bit lower at 46%. And the slide also notes that only 3% and 4% are planning expense decreases in digital transformation and cybersecurity, respectively. People are continuing to invest despite the uncertainty in the market, both within their control and out of their control. This tells us that we're not simply cutting across the board. It's not a peanut butter approach, but they're reallocating investments towards areas tied to growth, tied to risk management, and tied to operating resilience. Next slide. Yeah. So here's the next piece, right? AI is creating real value, but the execution remains the challenge. I had mentioned a couple slides ago about the paralysis. Organizations with fully integrated AI are seeing outside benefits, including being 4 times more likely to report revenue growth than organizations that are still piloting AI or just touching it here or there. The slide also notes that 81% reported increased efficiency, 64% reported higher quality outputs, with 59% reporting accelerated innovation. And that's across all levels within the innovation, from C-suite down to hands-on keyboard. But most companies are really struggling to realize the AI ROI. Only 8% say that these initiatives are meeting performance expectations, and only 12% say that the organization is AI ready. Going back to the previous slide talking about the legacy systems and capacity. So the key takeaway is that AI success is not only about adopting tools, it depends on strategy. It depends on governance, compliance, training, data readiness, and integration, and even workforce demographics. We want to understand our teams and our readiness so that we can pull the right levers and attain that ROI. Bobby?
Sure. And I would say a lot of these interesting findings, you can see even more details and insights into our 2026 AI Impact Survey report. I think it brings a really interesting perspective from a performance and a scalability perspective. So if you're interested, you can actually take a picture of the barcode and you'll be able to download the full report. And with that, let's talk a little bit about talent, because at the end, talent is a big driver for technology adoption and success. So I'm curious, Des, on what you're seeing and how does this compare in terms of what you're seeing with talent attraction and retention?
Yeah, thank you, Fabi. And as we make that transition, one thing that just I continued to think about as Mike was covering the content around AI and the importance of integration, right? And when I think about integration, I mean the real embedding it inside the organization as a way of doing business, as opposed to a simple add-on on top of other things that continue to operate the same way. And I can't help but reflect back as an auditor by trade to a quarter century ago when we had this thing called Sarbanes-Oxley, right, that first came out. And the companies that had just incremental cost from its adoption, who layered it on top of what they were already doing, versus the companies that actually embedded it inside their organizations. It became the new way of doing things, where they got the benefit of the enhanced control structure without the simple added level of regulatory cost. And so I think we're going to see some of those same both challenges and opportunities as we all move forward on this AI journey. Now, you teed up the interplay with talent here, and talent remains a major execution constraint for a number of our finance leaders. 57% of them that expect that they're going to continue to have challenges primarily in the attraction as well as the retention of talent. Now, while this is still, we saw back on a couple of slides earlier that it's still a top 5 area for cost savings. This slide also shows that there's the lowest potential for layoffs in the last 3 years at just 27%. So even in a more cautious environment, this data points to the fact that talent remains a critical area for organizations inclusive of the finance functions and the leaders that lead them. And as leaders are eager, go ahead, please, Bobby.
Oh, sorry, to that point on the layoffs, I think one of the things that is really interesting is remembering the demographics of our survey. Even though that we have a lot of enterprise customers here, a lot of this is mid-market companies. So a lot of the noise out there in terms of the tech companies doing big layoffs doesn't necessarily match with what the situation is on mid-market companies that may be growing a little bit more, cautiously, but still are having scalability challenges, looking to grow, and are really tapping into their existing talent and focusing on retention and maybe improving their benefits and their compensation without necessarily recruiting and increasing headcount, but really taking care of the people that they have today.
I think it's an excellent point. And the last thing, I'll turn it over to Mike here in a second to offer some additional thoughts. But as I look at this, I can't help but think back on a training session I had some time ago, and the leader around AI talked about that, people are concerned about their jobs being replaced by AI. And the message that they gave forward is you're not going to lose your job to AI, you're going to lose your job to somebody who knows how to use AI. And as I think about that aspect, it really hits on this intersection between talent and the investment in technology. Mike, let me turn it over to you for some thoughts.
Yeah, no, we're talking talent, we're talking technology. I'm gonna add one more T word to the equation, and that's trust, right? You need the talent and you need the trust in the organization for this to be true for those transformative initiatives. The technology can perform wonders, but it doesn't deliver outcomes alone. That's kind of the lesson that you had just mentioned from the training. Organizations still need the right talent. They need the process ownership, and they need the change management and capability to deliver that, to make these AI investments work. The neat thing here, and I know we're in the relative infancy of it, but you almost see a snowball effect. And that can be a positive snowball where you're seeing adoption and you're seeing creation and you're seeing it move forward. It can also be a negative one where it's, hey, we're trying, this is not working, it's starting, it's stopping, we don't really have a plan or a strategy. Both of those paths can accelerate pretty quickly. So again, that's where I go back to its talent and its trust.
Thank you, Mike. And with that, if you think about both cost reduction as a priority, talent constraints as a challenge itself, I think it kind of ties to what we're seeing with the global delivery models. So I'm curious, Des, if you can walk us through some of the findings in terms of how U.S. companies are leveraging offshore and nearshore models as part of their strategy.
Yeah, absolutely, Fabi. So it begins with what to be done, and then once what is defined, the how is the natural follow-on to that. And it's clear that CFOs are changing the how work gets done. We see 65% of the respondents are currently leveraging nearshoring or offshoring as part of their finance operating model, with nearshoring adoption in Latin America growing 11 percentage points just from Q1 to Q2, whereas you see offshoring in Asia and Europe remaining relatively flat over that same period with just 1% growth. Now, this slide indicates, as you can see here, that 37% of the respondents are already having some element of offshoring as part of their finance operating model to begin with, while 30% are already nearshoring here in Q2. 35% of the respondents continue to remain in all U.S.-based operation and are not planning currently to do offshoring or nearshoring. So I think our takeaway here is that finance operating models are becoming more flexible. CFOs are looking beyond the traditional U.S.-based model to address not just cost, but capacity as well as capability needs. This is not just a cost play. This is a talent play. And especially as companies, as I see the nearshoring element growing in adoption, it's reflective, I think, of a natural evolution as finance functions are transitioning from looking at those more transactional tasks that were more able to be offshored, that are less dependent upon collaboration or the time of day when it is done, to moving now these tasks that have a higher level of complexity, a higher need for skilled talent, as well as collaboration with their US-based headquarters, whether that be from a proximity for travel collaboration or a proximity from a timetable standpoint. And I think that is what we're seeing driving this big increase in the nearshoring, specifically in the Latin America market. Fabi, let me turn it back to you.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would add here is, going back again to the same topic, a lot of our demographic are first-time outsourcers exploring anything outside of the U.S. So what we're finding is that the nearshore model from Latin America provides the right combination between the cost optimization that they're looking for, but the lower risk of execution in many ways. So it seems to be like a natural first step into exploring global models. But at the same time, a lot of clients are actually leveraging a combination of both offshore and nearshore, depending on the task. And I think at the end, one of the key, I would say, insights and conclusions here is if you are a CFO on a current company in the US that it's part of that 35%, you should be rethinking in general how to, why the majority of the companies are leveraging this as a competitive advantage and really incorporate it into your priorities for Q3 and Q4. So with that, we're going to jump into the next polling question, which is, what are the biggest challenges you are facing today in the second half of 2026? Is it related to cost and improving margins? Is it related to accelerating automation, the successful execution of acquisitions and inorganic growth targets? You can select up to 3. So let's just focus on your top 3. Addressing talent shortages or cash and liquidity, as well as managing business risk. So let's give it some time here. And some of you have been asking on the question panel about getting a copy of the slides. So we can definitely share the slides for you. If you want to drop a note on the Q&A, we'll make sure to provide a copy. %84% of responses. I'll give it a couple of more seconds, and then we're going to turn it to Paul very quickly for the M&A and value creation section. %88%. Let's get a couple of more answers. Perfect. So let's see. Wow. So 50% reducing cost and improving margins, 38% accelerating automation with measurable ROI, 18% successful execution of growth and acquisitions, another 18% as well on organic growth targets, 17% talent shortages, 16% liquidity and cash, and 21% managing business risk. Any thoughts, Des, on this?
To me, I see this as, the intersection still of a need, to reduce cost, again, partly in response to areas of increasing costs that have to be overcome, while still trying to not impact the ability to grow the top line. That continues to be the pressure. I don't see companies shifting to a cut to profitability. There still has to be a growth for profitability, but to enable to fuel the growth, there has to be very surgical cost containment as opposed to the peanut butter spread that Mike referenced earlier.
Yeah, and Fabi, maybe if you just go back quickly, the one thought I had, which I think was a little stunning, was cash and liquidity being so far down the list. Maybe it's just a subset of how the poll was arranged in order, and in descending order had the highest response rate. But with talks of cost of capital, with talks of liquidity risk, I was surprised to see that so low. But anyway, before we get into, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was saying before we get into Paul and M&A, let's get real tactical quickly, and then we can move on to that piece. And this is another view, but instead of a year or the broader horizons, what are we looking at over the next 6 months, and where are we going to focus? And the top areas are technology upgrades, cybersecurity, cost optimization, each within the top 5 priorities, showing 65, 64, 64% respectively. This slide also shows that the biggest increase in Q2 from Q1 was on the supply chain side, while fraud, mitigation, and customer acquisition showed the largest declines. Broader takeaway, CFOs are not choosing between growth and technology or security and cost discipline. They're trying to manage all. And they're trying to manage all and make sure we prioritize them in a very, very volatile environment. So obviously that is a challenge across the board.
And as you said, Mike, right, like maybe cash and liquidity wasn't reflected as high because we just gave the audience the top 3 options. But if you see here, when we're really going broader into the top 5 options, then cash and liquidity actually is mentioned by 55% of companies, right? So I think it kind of like ties all together in a way.
Very true.
Excellent. So with that, we'll turn it over to Paul to hear some of the highlights in terms of the M&A activity and what you're seeing in the mid-market and private equity space, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Fabi, and thanks, Mike. Just turning to growth and capital strategy here and some of the findings from the survey related to those as well. Despite broader macro uncertainty we've already discussed today, M&A remains on the agenda. As you can see from the data, 42% of respondents expect their acquisition activity to increase over the next 12 months. Another 35% expected to remain unchanged. So together, more than 3/4 of respondents are expecting either an increase or stability in M&A activity. I think that's a good headline, but similar to a lot of the other data, the nuance is really in what makes up the number. I think for us, when you look at it and put it in context, remember that the optimism is coming off a relatively subdued period for corporate deal making. Activity has certainly been recovering since the 24 lull, as it were, but we're still well below where we were in 21 and 22. And much of the recovery is concentrated in larger or more strategic transactions than necessarily thinking more broadly around growth itself. The takeaway really is that companies aren't looking to do more acquisitions simply because capital is available or because they've got an M&A roadmap. They're looking to do acquisitions that solve important strategic or operational challenges. I think it ties back to the ideas that Mike talked about and Des at the start, that there's different levers being used to essentially address the same issue, which is around transformation, which is around upgrading technology, upgrading route to growth, as it were, within a business. And M&A certainly is a part of those levers. When you look at those strategic challenges we talked about, it comes through pretty clearly in the survey. Technology and AI-driven transformation is now the #1 value creation priority, with 60% of respondents citing that. And obviously things like revenue growth, cost optimization, and even M&A itself sort of lag that. That tells us that acquisitions are increasingly being used to accelerate digital capabilities, to acquire technology, to address AI readiness, and to Mike's point, ROI on AI, and to strengthen competitive positioning or attractive adjacencies, rather than necessarily just to simply add scale or think about the next thing, be that product, market, geography to knock down here as well. The practical takeaway is that corporate M&A is becoming more purposeful, and maybe the question has shifted a little bit from should we do the acquisition to what capability can't we build quickly enough through ourselves. The M&A is the answer here as well. And increasingly, obviously, acquisitions are becoming one of the fastest ways to accelerate transformation. And that's certainly come through in the research that we've done here as well. But Mike, I'm not sure anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think you've articulated well. There's what's the old Mark Twain quote? History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think that's some of the things that we're seeing here is what are the levers? How do we integrate and how do we execute? Not too dissimilar to our discussion on AI adoption or other economic uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. So, moving to AI itself, it's obviously changing the M&A process itself, not just a destination of spending. More than half of our respondents are already using AI, of course, or advanced analytics during diligence, whether that's just through quality of earning analysis or forecasting or anomaly detection, at the risk end of the spectrum with deals. Nearly half are using it to support value creation planning as well, while others are applying it to target identification, deal sourcing, a variety of that sort of top of funnel consideration here as well. What's interesting, I think, here is that AI is improving both, if you take this data at face value, it's improving both decision quality as well as execution speed. And organizations are using it to process more information, identify risks earlier, spend more time on strategic judgment rather than just manual analysis. But perhaps more importantly, AI itself is changing what companies choose to acquire as well. Increasingly, we're seeing acquisitions driven by technology capabilities or lack thereof, proprietary data or lack thereof, AI talent and software platforms that would otherwise take years to either recruit for or to build organically. And ultimately, AI isn't simply becoming another diligence tool, it's becoming one of the primary strategic reasons companies pursue acquisitions in the first place.
How sophisticated, Paul, do you think private equities are currently in-house to, bring some of these AI tools for due diligence analysis versus maybe working with third-party experts like yourself that does due diligence all the time? Or is it a little bit of a combination? Like, how are you seeing that mix on how they are acquiring these AI skills?
Well, I think that it's with a lot of what we've seen in the last sort of 18 months around corporate M&A dovetailing with the rise of usage of AI itself, we're seeing a little bit of a coming together in that regard. And so what we're seeing more so is from our seat in the park, clients who maybe have driven a thesis or a perspective or think about the six key questions or issues around an acquisition, they're coming to us with them as opposed to just the asset itself. I think to Mike's point, the AI supplements a lot of what CFOs and corporate strategists and consultants do, but essentially it helps maybe get us to answer the right questions or at least see the right questions sooner, as opposed to necessarily answer those questions. So, we've definitely seen from ourselves a greater usage of AI among our corporate clients, but it's not replacing anything that they would be doing with external parties in that regard. If anything, it's probably allowing them to think about asset identification a little differently. It's allowing them to more quickly do the secondary research they would have been doing previously anyway. And so I think it's allowing for a little bit more of the speed in that regard.
Excellent. Any thoughts before we move into the next slide on shortfalls or? Okay.
Cool. Great. It does seem as though as we've talked about, and perhaps this also dovetails a little bit with the AI discussion as well, is when you think about value creation shortfalls here and what the survey is telling us and what we're sort of experiencing here as well. The challenge isn't in completing the acquisition, it's in realizing the value from the acquisition. And perhaps the most interesting, or one of the most interesting findings in the survey, is where organizations believe value creation is falling short. More than half point to post-close integration as the biggest obstacle to realizing value. You know, this goes back again to some of the comments Des made and some of the comments Mike made about talent and some of the things around limitations that folks see to either growth or strategic direction, being either the technology, the systems, the processes, the people that are sort of embedded within an organization today. There's also obviously market changes, leadership gaps, overestimated synergies, you know, execution challenges are all sort of following closely behind. But what is striking is that none of these are really transaction problems. They're operating model problems. For corporate acquirers, success isn't determined by signing the purchase agreement. It's determined by how effectively the acquiring business is frankly integrated, how quickly technology and operations come together, how well talent is retained, how to think about amplification of key strengths across a larger organization, et cetera. And increasingly, these leading organizations are recognizing the value creation can't begin after the deal closes. The integration strategy, the tech roadmap, the organizational design synergy plan, all of those things, they've got to kind of become part of diligence. So I think it dovetails with the question on the prior slide as well, Fabi, and something that we have seen in spades over the last, over the last 2 years, this idea that there is a significant increase in value creation objectives in part of the diligence asks. Folks used to do 100-day plans, they used to do integration plans, et cetera, after the closing dinner. Today, those things are happening midpoint of deal processes, and either management teams or C-suites or consultants like us are having to make sure that we're fitting with where it makes sense as well.
Yeah, no, Paul, I think that's well said. We like to use the term deal speed, but deal speed doesn't need to end once the deal closes, right? A lot of these things, to your point, are operational and execution, and it's like, okay, we take our foot off the gas because we've dotted our final I or crossed our final T. Well, that doesn't work if you're not going to deliver on the investment thesis. So again, whether it's AI adoption, whether it's the transformation that we started talking about, or even the M&A stuff, making sure we can execute with the right talent to go through the process is imperative, and that doesn't start right when the transaction closes. That's got to be over the horizon. Bobby, I know we're moving towards the full hour, and we probably got some folks that are anxious to get some CPE. So maybe to the next polling question.
Sure. So polling question number 3, and related to the topic, where does your organization face the biggest challenges today in realizing value from acquisitions? Please select the top 2. Underwriting achievable value creation opportunities, executing integration plans after close, capturing planned synergies, managing organizational change and talent, and measuring post-close performance. But yeah, Paul, it's great to hear that you're seeing more and more those aspects being considered in the due diligence process in terms of the actual operating model and execution plans. I'm sure that if you ask Mike, probably he would say that he still gets brought in sometimes into those efficiency conversations a little bit later than expected. And, hopefully companies continue doing that as early as possible. But I still see some CFOs reaching out after 2 years of being acquired.
Well, on that point, it means that, what we're seeing a lot ourselves in our own business, collectively across Grant Thornton, is much more of a hybrid of solutions here, not necessarily a siloing. And so there's far more of a sequence where we're running through not just deal process, but growth processes as well. And they're very much one and the same.
Definitely. So if you see, this kind of like aligns with what you were discussing, but I do think that it's interesting because managing organizational change and talent management came also higher than what we have been discussing. But if you see, like 38% are actually saying execution on the integration plans after close. Capturing plan synergies, to me, it's kind of similar because it's also all about execution, 34%, but then equally as high, the change management aspect at 37%. And, like achievable value creation opportunities at 23%, and then measuring post-close performance, 18%. Any thoughts? I guess no big surprises.
No surprises, but one thing I would just offer up, as I think through this, the winning the bid, winning the transaction typically is a function of three things, right? It's speed to close, what Mike referenced earlier. It's certainty to close, and it's transaction value. And clearly transaction value is informed by the analysis that's done in anticipation of those post-deal synergies. But that's how you win the deal. To determine whether the deal was a win for the organization is all based on the ability to realize the synergies and all the post-integration elements that are kind of captured as part of this analysis.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any practical advice in terms of the 37% of managing organizational change and talent? Like, is there something, Paul, that you maybe see recurrently being done by the companies that are successful on, change management?
It's probably out of all of these things, you can prep for a lot of things pre-deal and you can engage in a lot of things pre-deal. There's obviously still sensitivities around people engagement to large degrees pre-deal. I think that's a function of deal processes at the moment. What we see, though, a lot of is folks who are essentially willing to almost like diligence as a separate stream, not just, leadership and people strategy, but frankly, how to think about everything from comp structures through to competency models, through to org designs, et cetera. Having that as diligence and being able to see how it's going to sit within a larger organization, we think opens a lot of doors to ideally making sure people feel more comfortable with a transaction like we're describing here. That's one thing that we've seen really grow. I think one of the data points we were given by an investment bank was that sort of HR diligence was probably around 20-25% attach rate to deals 3 or 4 years ago. Today, it's up close to 75%. So it talks to the fact that becomes more important. We're not diligencing it to have an aha or a gotcha moment with the sellers. We're diligencing it because we need to make sure that we're going to get the people piece right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think with that, we have a lot of questions from the audience. So while I'm going to be reading those questions, I wanted to pull our last polling question that it's really more about, whether would you be interested in debriefing about some of these results with our panelists today, whether, your concerns or challenges are more related to cost reduction, to tariffs and taxes, to supply chain needs, or even, your transaction and M&A practices. We would be happy and glad to have a one-on-one discussion. So while you guys respond to that, I am going to read some of the questions. And I think this one, Des, is probably for you because it was about the trends on how they were changing quarter over quarter. Remember how you said that typically, historically, you have been seeing Q2 optimism to drop versus Q1 as a trend. The question was like, how does the other quarters compare? So I know we don't have the details here, and maybe that's a great analysis that we can send back, like more of like the multi-year trend of Q1 versus Q2 since 2021. But I'm curious if you had any comments for them.
So, simply that I don't think we can draw a specific conclusion because there is an intersection with the events that occur as well, right? So the timing of the events that drive those responses. I just found it interesting as I was looking at it. Like I said, 3 of the past 5 years, Q2 had the highest level of pessimism versus the other quarters. And there wasn't a high level of consistency in looking through that data over the 5-year trend to say that another quarter was always the most optimistic. Although I will tell you that it's natural, especially for those companies that are calendar year-based companies that are in Q4, right, oftentimes finalizing their projections, there tends to be a level of optimism that comes through that process just as a natural output. Then there becomes an adjustment period in Q1, and then reality sets in an element of Q2. So I think there is probably some aspect of that being reflected in the overall results.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Mike?
No, I mean, I think there's ebbs and flows. And I don't think we have a material sample size to draw the gloom of Q2 being a problem, but it is an interesting data point, something that we should keep in mind. And yeah, I think as organizations turn the calendar from one fiscal year to the next, I think there probably is a bit of optimism as they're building out their annual operating plan for the following year.
Sure. One of the questions here was also related to M&A. So it says, as M&A shifts towards precision, value-driven deals, how should CFOs interpret these strategic acquisition limited fields where capacity scarcity, tech enablement, and execution fragility reshape decision logic? That's a complex question.
Yeah, I'll do my best in 30 seconds. I think it's a really important question. I think that part of it starts on the deal sourcing as well piece. Obviously CFOs are prioritizing acquisitions that are going to accelerate technology, AI capabilities, operational efficiency, et cetera. But I think the important thing here is that CFOs and deal teams within corporates and M&A strategists are underwriting execution, perhaps to a level that is concerning them. And I think that what we have seen starting to happen now more is not just thinking about that underwriting case to get the deal done, but making sure that we're leveraging technology, AI, and a variety of other M&A tools to actually get us smarter on the likelihood of realization of the underwriting case, and to make sure that we're actually able to execute it strongly coming out of the gate, to Mike's point, at deal speed. That's where we're seeing a lot more of the technology and AI changes happening, but it's also where there's perhaps the greatest room for greater leveraging of those tools as well, because the rhetoric and the reality are still pretty far apart. The rhetoric is that I've got an underwriting execution case that gets me my deal value, but the reality is that internally I'm unable to execute to that, given current resourcing.
Thank you, Paul. And I know we're almost on top of the hour, so I really wanted to thank first the panelists for amazing contributions and for the good discussion, and to everyone that attended today's webinar. As I mentioned, the CFO survey is an evolving study, and we would welcome always your feedback in terms of specific themes and topics that you would like us to see incorporating in future reports. And we hope you can join us for Q3. We took notes of everyone that wanted the presentation, so we'll make sure to share those with you. And if we couldn't answer your question, we'll make sure to contact you offline. But thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
That concludes today's webcast. If you have questions or would like more information after the conclusion of this webcast, please feel free to contact any of the presenters using the information found in the resource widget. We want to thank the audience for attending and for participating in today's event. We would also like to thank today's speakers for making today's interactive webcast possible. If you have met the CPE requirements for today's webcast, you'll be able to download a copy of your certificate using the CPE widget located on the dock at the bottom of your screen. You'll also receive an email with a link to download your certificate. Concluding today's live event, you'll be asked to complete a short survey. We encourage all feedback and suggestions to better improve our webcast experience. The link to download the slides remains available for a limited time, so obtain your copy today. We will also share the recording and slides via email. Be sure to connect with us on our site or follow us on social media to stay up to date on future events. We look forward to seeing you on a future Grant Thornton webcast.